Hey everybody, this is Tim Hinton from Marching Arts Education and the Marching Roundtable podcast. So happy to be talking to Keith Potter today. Keith, how are you?
Doing great. How are you doing?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for taking time to talk with me. We're going to talk about the Boston show Goliath. I'm really excited to get some details and hear more about it. We're recording this in the middle of spring training. It's actually June 7th that we're recording this today. So how are things going as far as preparation for the show?
It's fast and furious. You know, we can't control the weather, so there has been quite a bit of rain, and that not only causes a problem about being out in the rain, but in our particular location, it causes some trouble with field usage because the other fields that aren't the main field are really low, and so when it rains, even moderately, it floods those fields, and so we end up kind of having to scramble for one turf field. And so that's been probably the biggest challenge, but the members and the staff that has been producing day after day have worked together, have had to be flexible and flip the plans and get everybody in fields that aren't flooded. And so a little bit challenging, but weather is always there every season, every core. You just have to work around it. But I think if we've had any challenge, it's been weather. But like I said, we're moving right along. We're on schedule with production. We're probably 75 to 80% on the field. Hopefully, we'll put the rest of it on, over the next couple of days. Of course, there's a lot more detail and layering and production to be done. Usually, the way it goes is like brass learns the drill, percussion kind of falls in next, and then the guard is kind of usually on a very normal, reasonable 1 to 2 day lag as they're like producing the numbers before where the core is. Then they kind of catch up, and so it's like a rotating situation to get the production on the field.
Well, I loved being at April camp, and we were talking about how much talent the core had, and I loved getting to talk to you and Brady and Gino and that whole crowd. It was really exciting. So anybody that's watching this, if you haven't seen the April camp videos, by all means, go to marchingartseducation.com and check that out. So Keith, let's talk about the show Goliath. I'm really excited to hear more about it. Is it a David and Goliath theme?
Yeah, we I guess kind of worked back, forward and back from the concept of David and Goliath. I think the concept of Goliath kind of came up because of the core's connection to the core of giants and the core song, and there's a history of this giant connection. But of course, then that led us to Goliath, and that led us to David and Goliath, which kind of sparked this love of underdog movies and literature and film. And I'm a huge my friend Rosie Queen and I always talk about how much we love Rocky and Karate Kid, and so those two, along with, of course, I'm from Indiana, so Hoosiers is another big underdog movie, and the emotion that gets stirred in an audience to cheer for an underdog in those movies. I was telling somebody the story the other day that I remember watching Rocky IV when I was young in the theater when it first came out, because there was no Netflix or anything. So it was in a packed theater when it was released, and it was crazy that we were like cheering for Rocky in a movie theater. Like the screen couldn't hear us, it was like, but it was so crazy. Like there's people throwing popcorn at the screen, and those movies stir so much intuitive emotion to cheer for an underdog that it became it then kind of checked this box of like, well, maybe we can extract some of those themes and have the ability to strike some of those emotions with our viewers. And so that really was the excitement about this underdog theme. And then, of course, the the idea that, and we talked about this in Tampa, was that we've kind of come upon these human will type productions over the last 2 years, and this seemed to fit into our brand while shifting a little bit, because I think probably more so than the Witch Trials or the Castaway, Lord of the Flies kind of idea. This story is a little bit more thematic than it is linear in terms of literal storytelling. There are things that we can deal with in terms of scale, in terms of being outnumbered, in terms of divisions, in terms of heroic aspirations. Those things are thematic and can be shown in a non-linear way in the show. So I think you're still going to get that human will quality and that cheer for the underdog quality. But I think it might be kind of an evolution of where our brand has come from.
Well, I love that you guys have tapped into these sort of universal emotional stories that and this seems perfectly aligned with that. Absolutely, I agree with you completely. And we all have had those experiences of being in a movie theater, and you're surrounded by the sight and the sound and the excitement of being in a crowd. I have a friend that hates to go to like opening night movies, but there are certain movies where I'm like, okay, Star Wars, I'm going to be there on like that Thursday night, 8 p.m. or whatever. I want to be in the middle of that frenzy because it's so exciting. Everybody else is excited too. You're in the middle of this. So to me, that's a very exciting experience. And I love the idea of bringing some of that to our activity, into our field. I can totally think that. And you're absolutely right. Underdog stories, we all relate to those and we all cheer for those guys. So that seems like a great setup for you guys for the summer.
Yeah, I think that I think we see it in sports too. There are certain like diehard fans for the big Goliath teams, and that is to me that's a different kind of awesomeness to see a group that has, whether it's baseball, football, basketball, whatever, to see a team that's just consistently great, like over decades. That's a cool thing too. But still, you catch yourselves even watching a Super Bowl or watching a World Series, or you still find yourselves with a lot of people in the room excited about the team that shouldn't win rising up. And so it's not there's all sides to it, but in our case the Goliath story is we're taking that approach this year.
No, I love that. And I got to tell you, well, for one thing, that's why I love March Madness, because any scrappy team like has a chance in that scenario. That's why I think that's super fun. But also, I'll tell you, if I'm just turn on the TV and want to watch a college football game, I will tend to root for the guy that's not supposed to win. Sure. Like there's something exciting about, like you said, like that, the underdog coming up trying to beat the big behemoth. Like I just sort of tend to do that.
Especially when you look in sports at rankings or at seedings, and then so you see the numbers. You see like, oh, here's number 2 team playing non-ranked team, and you kind of want the non-ranked team to rise up. So there's basically, when it comes down to it, it's a band show what we're putting on the field. So the question always is there enough here to draw on? Is there enough emotion? Is there enough visual depiction of what the concept is? Is there enough music that we can create range and cohesion? And if you can kind of go through those initial steps in September and yes, then it becomes viable. And so ultimately that's where we are.
No, but I think this is a really interesting thing that you point out, because for any designers that are watching this conversation, I always like to point out to them over and over again something that's very simple that we can all relate to. That's like makes for the best show things. You don't want to have something that it takes you 20 minutes to explain. Michael Cesario always says, can you say it in 3 words?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that, or either it doesn't take words and it's okay if it's just essence of or abstract,
Sure.
all perfectly perfectly fine. I think it's where you can run into trouble, or I have personally, um, is it being something that needs explanation and it takes too much to explain.
Right. Right. But
So
I mean, I feel like everybody knows David and Goliath. Everybody knows what it means to
right.
root for the underdog. Like we come in with that clearly understood. So that gives you a great starting point for your audience.
Yeah. And the other thing about the kind of emotional, inspirational part of the underdog stories is that it has led us to some really exciting music. Um, of course, we want to have a visual through line and a musical through line, but sometimes if you're staying true to a through line, it can lead you into places you might prefer it didn't. And in this case, it led us to a lot of variety, some things that I think the audience will be able to go, I know that, and it'll resonate with them. It'll resonate that is a reflection of the show idea. And then there's stuff in there that's a little bit more obscure, and then the virtuosity might just be what resonates. Um, so it has, like I said, back in September, it was like here's the idea, and um, here is how that could turn into a visual, a drill, a choreographic, a musical, a production. And sometimes you come up with an idea that you start to do those exercises of like, well, how does that translate to choreography, and how does that translate to props, and what does that look like? And you kind of find out that the idea maybe seemed cooler, but maybe not as conducive to what we do. You have to ultimately, again, at the end of the day, it has to translate to a giant football field, um, and marching, playing, dancing, spinning, um, space manipulation, drill, whatever. And I think this one does. Like I said, everything I've seen on the field so far, um, in one way or another, connects to the idea and/or creates an accessible, understandable, or enjoyable experience, I think, for viewers.
Cool. So let's talk about what it's going to look like. What does the show look like? Because the images in your teaser video is sort of like, David with the rock and the slingshot or whatever. And so are we in that world, or what world are you taking us to visually?
Yeah, we're kind of taking, it was funny because when that was a big discussion when we started, because if you look up any David and Goliath um, images, they're obviously very, very old, and there's not a lot of clothing. It's like a tunic, or maybe no shirt, maybe some kind of toga drape kind of thing. And so the very first thing we had to do was kind of figure out how to place this in a different scene, different scenario, different aesthetic, because we wanted to be able to have a little bit more opportunity to create detailing in the costuming, and so I think what you'll see is kind of this, like, I look at it almost a little bit more like the Hunger Games, which of course is another underdog story for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The Katniss, Aberdeen, kind of the districts and versus the capital, um, and so there's a kind of like post-apocalyptic quality to where there's definitely a Goliath look, which is much more ornate and armored and futuristic armored, but looking like they have the protection and the strength and the resources of a Goliath. And then there's the guard kind of takes on the districts or the Katniss, um, more peasant, more simple, humble beginnings, and so that we could not only in color but in texture and in quality contrast. It's just another way to show the David and Goliath imagery, as one is like super super resourced and one is scraps. that are covering their body so that they can also prepare for battle, but in a much different way than what the Goliath look is. And that's not to say that 100% of the time that the core is Goliath and the guard is David. It's, again, it's not that linear, but we did want to have that contrast to play with at times. I think at times they can, the entire ensemble can take on a David or Goliath image or character, but often we play the two against each other that way.
Really interesting.
There are
what about the stage setting? Do you want to talk about that at all?
Oh yeah, that's where I was heading.
Perfect.
There are these giant walls which and they have these like pegs on them. They're kind of, they're tilted back. I guess it's kind of like a triangle, and there's 5 of these giant walls, and one, we wanted to again create something where if a person standing on the ground was looking up at this wall with people on it or not with people on it, that there would be that scale contrast. The other thing with the walls is it creates division, which is kind of the crux of any competition or any battle, whether it's for ideology or for land, for region, for religion, whatever the competition is. These walls help draw a line in the sand. They create scale, and they also have this kind of like post-apocalyptic torture device look.
That's interesting. I can't wait to see that. I love it.
Because they're so big and there's 5 of them, they take up a lot of space. It helps. It does add a coloration and an aesthetic to the field that takes it a little bit away from a football field. Of course, we still have the giant Colts helmet in the middle of the field, but
of course.
That thing covered up.
No, but I mean, how interesting that the way you've described that and the way you can use it, but then having these giant things, I'm interested to see all the different ways that the very smart visual team will decide to maneuver them or use them, or so I'll be watching for that. I know you're using one of my favorite songs, which is the Tears for Fears. Everybody Wants to Rule the World. Like, this is one of my favorite songs. But my impression is you're doing it as a ballad, and it's sort of like the slow version. Am I right about that?
Yeah, it weaves through the show. There's that ostinato in that, in the original Tears for Fears version of it, and that's been extrapolated out in many other cover versions of it. In fact, I saw on YouTube a dulcimer player playing this. It was really cool, and so we took that dulcimer, and that kind of became David's leitmotif. That's
awesome. I love that.
And then the piece that we play in the closer is called Once Upon a Castle, and it's a big pipe organ piece. And so we took that pipe organ sound and made that Goliath's leitmotif. So we played this giant like pipe organ, which is powerful and bold and big and ornate, against the dulcimer, which is much more delicate and simple and from a simpler time, and so that contrast is another cool way to show Goliath is a pipe organ and David is the dulcimer. And plus it's a great thing for our front ensemble to just add another color and another technical playing ability.
I'm really impressed with that, what you just described, because organs have all kinds of connotations and dulcimers have all kinds of connotations, and that does immediately, I see that separation so clearly, because like you said, dulcimers are sort of earthy, one person sits in a quiet Appalachian cabin, whereas the organ, we talk about these monolithic churches made of granite or whatever. So I love that. That's really a smart choice as far as creating that separation, those motifs. That's really a great example of how to do this activity and share the story and ideas in these interesting ways musically.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was saying about the about the check boxes in the beginning of the season is like, well, how many different ways can we show this? It's a long show. And so, of course, we had listened to Everybody Wants to Rule the World, and it worked out. We do use it in the beginning of the show combined with a Son Lux piece, Enough of Our Machines. So that becomes the beginning of the show. And we wanted to start the show with very similar to Rocky or Karate Kid, where it's like just this kind of innocent, humble beginnings, and working to these, not being heroic at that point, but aspiring to be heroic. And that's what, like, the Everybody Wants to Rule the World kind of plays the end of the opener. It comes back to be the ballad when it's almost like, once I thought, I aspired to be heroic, and now we're face to face with competitors now. And so the way that it comes back and the way that it runs through the show, and then taking that ostinato against the pipe organ, it kind of helps create this cohesion, even though they're not back to back. It comes back later. And I think the song itself, the lyrics themselves, speak to the concept.
Well, and I love it when you take a very, very popular, well-known song and then do all kinds of interesting things with it. So you're using a singer again. Let's talk about that choice.
Well, we are using some lyrics throughout. A lot of the times it's it's played on a keyboard or on a synthesizer. It's not so much that we're highlighting a singer like we did in Wicked Games. We just thought that there were times where a spoken, especially in my shot, a spoken lyric or a sung lyric in small doses was the right texture, color, and conceptual thing to do. But no, it's not a here's our singer, in the stockades like Wicked Games. It's right. It's not. It's a part of the color and texture, but it's not featured like it was.
Okay, that's cool. Thank you for explaining that. And I do think it's interesting that in this sort of modern world of marching production, we have this new ability to have voices, lyrics, certain phrases be said, spoken, sung, whatever. I do think it's interesting to use that. So I look forward to seeing how that's sort of judiciously used throughout the show to help tell the story.
It's another instrument. The way that it's played and the way that it's composed in and then executed in terms of timing and ensemble and balance, and I think the frequency and the amount is important too. So it never seems out of place and it never seems like it's constant. And so it's a design element that I at least this year I'm kind of looking at it like another instrument. And there's some spoken word in the beginning of the show as well, where it's kind of like you hear a preacher at the very beginning kind of reading the David and Goliath scripture. So it kind of takes you into this. We listened to Christian Zeal and Activity, the John Adams piece. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but
actually have heard that, yes.
Yeah, it's got the looping preacher that's a color and a texture, and we really like that. And so we kind of were inspired by that. And so we have a little bit of that scripture looping, and we have a little bit of David's thoughts in the beginning of his aspirations, and a little bit of Everybody Wants to Rule the World. And so again, it's just trying to create a musical and conceptual texture that allows it to live when it's appropriate and not be shocking when all of a sudden you hear where did that come from? So it has to be kind of woven through the whole production.
Well, and what I think is interesting is we're in this age of soundscapes, really, is sort of what people are calling them. And it's like creating this certain sound with all these voices, whatever you want to include. What I love about what you guys have been doing the last few years is I've always felt like I wasn't there was nothing about the sound, I'll call it the soundscape that you guys created for all that I'm hearing. There was nothing about it to me that seemed jarring or out of balance or whatever. And I think that's really hard. I think when people in our activity are still struggling with that. So I'm interested to see how you do that this year, how you balance all those things, because I think you guys do that really, really well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge always is, and I see this in other groups in the fall that I work with, is, you know, resisting the urge to try to explain what you're doing when you have voiceovers. You know, I think the challenge is to use it as a texture and a color and a through line. But, you know, sometimes we get tempted to try to explain too much with a voiceover. And then, you know, then it's like, well, maybe this didn't check all of the design boxes that could translate to visual and musical design, and I think it could get in the way.
Right.
So, but I'm only speaking about my experience with it. You know, everybody has their preference and how they do it, but I know that as we're working on this, we're just trying to use it, of course, just the right amount so that it's welcomed when you hear it, and it's not never in the way.
Well, you know, the other thing that makes me think of is I had this wonderful conversation about the Etude show this winter with Byron Valentine, Brian Wynn, and my boy, so smart. And one of the things they talked about, if you haven't seen that, by the way, everybody should go listen to that podcast. It was so interesting to talk to them. But one of the things they talked about was that they had some very specific things of what the show meant to them, but they were very happy for everybody to react to it and take away from it whatever they wanted to personally. They didn't want to say this is what this means, but they felt like exactly what you said. They felt like if they portrayed it with the right visuals and music and movement and everything, that we would understand what they're saying, and then I can make it mine. And I love that idea. So I'm sure the same thing's going to be true here. We understand it's an underdog story. We come to with that context, but I can sort of interpret it how it moves me and the emotions I bring to the table. I love that about modern show design.
Yeah, yeah. I think I mean, I think it's just a flexibility thing while you're designing. It's got to have enough to hold on to, and enough that it's not confusing if it's not exactly the same for everybody. You know, and
right,
so,
but leave us some space. I love that like give us the opportunity to bring something to it too. I really love it, and I think you guys at Boston have been masters at doing that the last few years. So when I was at April Camp, there was a lot of discussion about herald trumpets.
Yeah.
And I want to know about that because I haven't been able to say anything to anybody about it, and I'm sure we're going to be seeing them in the show. Can you tell me a little bit about how those are used?
Yeah, well, in my shot, one of the things, you know, the design team went up to Chicago in December, and we saw Hamilton, and you know, and at that point we knew we wanted to really like the connection of like taking that one sling shot, you know, to knock down Goliath, and associating that with my shot, and some of those lyrics are completely appropriate. Some aren't. Some are very specific, and so we don't use those. But you know, right. Some of what that means is entirely appropriate and fits the David and Goliath concept. But one of the things was like, okay, well, we knew we were going to make it our percussion heavy song, and we wanted to play with the rap again as an instrument for the you know, for the percussion to get all of that intricate rhythmic content of what rap is and what that. I mean, there's that song and that whole musical. It's just so much text. You know, there's so much to be said in such a short amount of time. It's rapid fire, and it just seemed like this is perfect to translate to a drum feature because there's so much. You know, there's so much rhythmic opportunity. That one you have to display, and two that appropriately matches that content.
Yeah, when you see Hamilton, it's amazing to me how I was able to process and take in all this information because they presented it so cleverly and so clearly, and so taking that for your use makes perfect sense to me.
Well, getting to your herald trumpet question, the thing that I thought was one of the things that we would need to contend with is, or could contend with, is how could the brass interact in this piece? Certainly giant drum windows, but from a pacing standpoint, how can we keep the brass engaged besides a visual component? And so we speaking of Rocky, I kind of started to feel like the not throwing away my shot, that tempo and feel went great with bum 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 beam bum bum bum. And so we started then to make the brass parts from Rocky and the drum and rap parts from my shot, and it was a really cool combination, which gave both groups the opportunity to participate musically. Yeah. And so in Rocky, probably I wasn't even as familiar with this part of the Rocky piece from the movie. I didn't remember this, but there's this in the Rocky fanfare. There's this like throwdown of brass fanfare, and so as we weaved out of my shot and into Rocky, it evolves into this fanfare with trumpets and trombones, or herald trumpets and trombones, and then of course the rest of the brass ultimately adds in and supports all of that. But that's where the herald trumpets come from, and they they do a cool
to hear that. That is so exciting. I love that idea, and you're right. Like those two songs go together. That's brilliant. I love it.
Yeah, and again, it took us back to the Rocky underdog thing that I love so much, and I couldn't find a great song in Karate Kid for our purposes, but because I think honestly I prefer that movie.
I gotta throw in one of the
throw in the crane.
No, but I totally get that. I'm not throwing away my shot. Like that totally makes sense to my head immediately. I cannot wait to see how that fits together.
It's a pretty crazy song. It's it's actually a pretty long production by the time you put all of that together, but it goes on this it's a roller coaster. And it of course ends with, after the fanfare, it cranks up one more time, and there's like a Hamilton or a My Shot shout chorus that's like, it just, you're going along and it's enjoyable and it's exciting and everybody's doing their thing, and then you think, okay, this has got to be over, and then it goes into overdrive to push to the end. So yeah, we're excited about this piece. It's fun to rehearse, it's fun to watch, and
Well, and here again is an example of like finding disparate, interesting pieces to put together that all make sense within the theme, and then weaving them together. Like, this is modern show design 101, really. I think it's really, really interesting, and I'm more excited than ever after all of this to see the production. Wow. Cool. And I'll have to wait and see how it ends. I don't even want you to tell me. I'll just have to wait.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can imagine how the David and Goliath story ends. So you'll there's some fun stuff in the closer that is can be very serious, but there's also some fun surprises in that song. But I've been away for a week, 4 days. Back home teaching high school, and so I go back tomorrow, and I'm there for about a week before the Corps goes back to Boston to do some of the they do a concert in the park, and they do a spring fling. It's it's a chance to get out in the community that supports us and perform. So we're going to have a stretch here that I'm going to go back for of more production, and then they go do that. And then they come back for a few more days to kind of wrap it up and do a community night in Castleton, where we do our move-in. And then we're off, and I join them up again a few days coming into Detroit to do the theater show. So I'm really excited about getting back in there and being in there a lot as we try to get this show up and running. I get the videos, I get the phone calls. We're still daily communicating on everything that we need to do, from props to costumes to flag designs to what did we have to pivot on based on a prop change or a prop need. And so, but it's not the same as being there.
Of course. No, but I think you guys are doing such great work. I'm so excited about everything that's going on with this core, and having this discussion, I'm more excited than ever to see the show. It sounds so creative and clever ways of putting all these pieces together to make your point. And I do love that you're giving me, I love it when I can come to the show already with some emotion around the concept. Like, that's built in. I think that's super smart the way you guys have been doing that. And here it is again, clearly on the table. So I love it. Anything you want to say before we finish the discussion?
No, it's always fun talking with you. And
Thank you.
once again, I'm excited for the season. And I know there's going to be a lot of amazing shows. Just from the snippets that I've seen and heard, and
Sure.
knowing all the people that are working everywhere, and the talent is crazy across the board in drum corps now. If drum corps is a lot of work and it's a lot of energy, and for the members it's a lot of money, and for the organizations it's a lot of money, and so when it's all fun and exciting, it makes it worth it. So
I love
I'm
it.
looking forward to an exciting year for everybody.
Well, and I love the fact that drum corps right now, it's like really there are 6, 7, 8 corps that could go in and win. And that's the way it should be. Everybody's amazing. Everybody's going to be doing great productions. That makes the show, the summer, super exciting for everyone. I know for you in the middle of it, it's probably stressful, but I love that. I want every corps to be fantastic. And I love the level of design and performance that's happening right now in the activity. Thank you for taking time to share all this with me and the people that got to watch it, because I love knowing some behind the scenes things about what the thought process was, or how you put this together. And it all is so smart. Keith, you're doing such great work. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Tim.
Find other interviews and videos from top DCI designers, instructors, and marchers, behind the scenes videos, interviews, and podcasts from winter camps, spring training, traveling during the season, and performances, all at marchingartseducation.com/DCI-2019. The Marching Roundtable is proud to be an official media partner of Drum Corps International.